We're never going to get fully away from the horizontal mindset. That's not the point. It's not about us all being perfect and perfectly beautiful and enlightened human beings. We're all a work in progress, but it is about how can we be more vertical more often and make more of these choices that, that take the high road and do the right thing, the better thing for more people than just these selfish, what's in it for me kind of choices.
Welcome back, listeners. Thank you if you're a returning listener, and welcome if you're a new one. This is Inspire Someone Today, your platform for amplifying inspiration. Today, I am joined by a leadership coach and a culture specialist all the way from Canada, Vancouver. He is Sasja Chomos. On this episode, we talk about cultures of excellence, how we can toggle two different kind of mindsets, and what does it take to stay in vertical mindset, and what leaders can do to make workplace well-being a top priority, and the investments they can make in making their people thrive. Join me as I chat up with Sasja. Sasja, good morning and thank you for joining Inspire Someone today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to all of our listeners as well to hear insights from you today.
I'm glad. I hope so. I hope to provide a few insights.
I do know that you run your own organization now, which is Dynamic Achievement, catering into many elements of creating culture of excellence and high performance. Before even we get in there, Sasja, if you can give us a bit about yourself, your background, and then we'll kind of jump right in.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my background, like a lot of people these days, those people that grew up knowing what they wanted to be when they grew up and when they were adults, et cetera, I was not one of those people. I'm still not. Yeah, I'm still not one of those people. I'm still deciding what I want to do in the next phase, so to speak. But a bit of how it happened, the short version anyway, in my early days coming out of university, I actually worked in tourism. And I worked on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, our nation's capital. And at first it was a fun summer job as a tour guide, but that actually led because I loved it so much and I decided to stay, it led into a number of positions of greater responsibility until eventually I became the manager of visitor services for our National Parliament building. So organizing all of the tours, the staffing, the recruitment, the training. And so it was my first experience being a manager, and so I'll say a leader, but with no concept of what that actually meant. So I would say that experience is one of the most common is people become a manager, supervisor, team leader, whatever it is. And really until you're in the job, nobody tells you that it's completely different than the job you were in before, even though that's usually what got you promoted in the first place. So that was the beginning for me of this exploration into what is leadership. At the same time, as I was just starting to get really curious about studying leadership, and I was actually looking at graduate programs for that, that coincided with my father's death, which we can touch on a bit as well, because it does relate to some of the work I do. But because of that, and because of my father's death, which was linked to a very toxic workplace that he was in, it became then almost this very personal mission of not only do I want to know what leadership is for me, I want to know how to help create other great leaders because I don't want people going through what my father went through. And so that led to a whole series of shifts in my life. One was a big move across the country, back out to the West, where I'm from originally. And it led me into leadership positions, first in human resources departments and within organizations. And then about 10 years ago, I decided to go on my own as a consultant. And so since then, I've worked in a variety of industries, everything from healthcare and education to automotive and IT and wealth management. So you name it, it's just a wide variety of work that I do. But it's all the same in the sense that the leadership challenges, the people challenges, the development of soft skills, all of that is the same no matter what industry you're in. It's just the context and what's going to be most successful is slightly different. But that's really, what's lit me up in terms of wanting to create cultures and workplaces where people can thrive. And so that's, in a nutshell, really how I've gotten to where I am today.
Well, that's a wonderful statement there. Creating workplaces where people can thrive. And you did mention about across industries, across verticals, there are certain commonalities. If I were to ask you, what is same, what is different in creating cultures of excellence?
Well, let me start first with cultures of excellence and what I even mean by that, because excellence is, it's one of these big terms that
So
can mean a
broad,
lot of
so
things.
broad.
It's so broad. And I mean, excellence in this context, in the way I like to think of it in the work we do with organizations, it is, of course, about the excellence of results, because at the end of the day, businesses are certainly looking for this, even nonprofits. I mean, everyone is looking for excellence in their results. They want to be able to perform at the highest level. But in order to do that, it really requires, of course, being excellent with your people, being excellent in how you lead, being excellent in how a team is brought together. And the big piece in all of this is that it also means we need to have excellence in our mindset. And that's at the core of the work that we do fundamentally, is exploring what our mindsets are, because they determine the results we get, both in terms of how we interact and lead other people, as well as how we actually get the job done. So as an example, if I have the mindset of I'm a victim, right? Things happen to me. Oh, poor me. This is happening in the market, or we've got this pandemic and, poor me, this is impacting all my results and there's nothing I can do about it. Well, that's one type of mindset. And as soon as you have that mindset of, oh, there's nothing I can do about it, this is being done to me, woe was me. Well, you can imagine you're not going to do much to change that, versus a much more empowered mindset, a creative mindset, which is, oh, wow, like there's tough stuff happening in the market. We have a pandemic going on or whatever it is. I need to figure out some more creative solutions around this. Different types of mindsets will give you different results. And that happens not only in how we produce the actual results in the business, but it happens in terms of how we interact with other people. Again, back to, if I have that victim mindset, oh, poor me. Oh, Shri, you said that thing about me and it wasn't very nice. And now I don't know how to work with you. And, poor me. There's nothing I can do about the fact that you are the way you are. That would be one way to react to you if we're having, say a disagreement. But the other way, again, the much more empowered way is, Shri, you said something I didn't care for. Here's the impact it had on me. Here's what I would like to happen between you and me instead. I have the power to change the outcome of our dynamic, even as individuals with each other. So the mindset work is fundamentally at the core of it. And all of that to say that those are really the three pillars of excellence culture creates, is not only the results, but the results with people, with the business, and of course, what's happening in our mindset. So back to your question now of what's same and what's different in terms of cultures of excellence, or in cultures across industries. Well, again, what I think the biggest sameness is that the people challenges are fundamentally the same, no matter what industry I'm dealing with. And it might be, it could be, for example, a not-for-profit that they're not really interested in dollars per se or the bottom line. They're much more interested in a cause or the good that they're creating. That might be different than a focus of, let's say, a bank that's trying to produce some very tangible bottom line results. But the people challenges are all the same. Leaders are still not sleeping at night for the same reasons, and staff members are still not sleeping at night for the same reasons. It might be, I'm having conflict with this person on my team, or there's conflict between, the leader and the staff member. There are challenges between, we can't seem to get alignment here. I thought we had agreement, but we don't have agreement. There's miscommunication happening. So all of those issues are fundamentally the same. People are told, you need to work better as a team, but they don't know how to work together as a team. So there's dysfunction happening. All of that stuff is really quite similar. What's different is, again, the individual context they operate in. There's the nuances of their business, right? So if I'm in sales, let's say I'm in a retail environment and there's a high focus on sales, there might be a huge customer service element to my business, all the rest of it. I'm really focused again on sales and dollars, figures, etc. That might be different than, let's say, another type of organization where their focus is much more on what good am I creating for people, right? How am I taking care of someone? Let's say even in healthcare, where my goal is to keep people alive, to keep them healthy, to help them recovering. So the context might be different, but it doesn't change what's happening in the relationships and the interactions between human beings. That for me is the single biggest common factor, no matter where you go.
That's very interesting. Two elements that I kind of drew from it. One is the whole mindset piece of it, how you kind of look at it. Second is it boils down to people. People are people, no matter where they are.
Yeah. And there'll be nuances, right? There might be cultural nuances, and it can vary, of course, from country to country as well. But at the same time, even people I've spoken with across the country, although there might be some particular different norms or cultural or ethnic differences, at the end of the day, most of us still want the same thing, which is around feeling valued, respected, seen, heard. I mean, I don't know of a human being that I've met yet that doesn't want those things.
And you're somebody who sets the template or the tempo for the culture of organization. How critical it is in stitching these two pieces of mindset and the people element around that.
Well, in my view, and I'm biased now, of course, because of the work I do in mindset, but for me, it's essential. When I first started working in leadership development, I taught skills. I would teach leaders how to communicate more effectively, how to resolve conflict, how to manage performance. Like again, which leaders who've been through a leadership development program, that's the stuff they've covered. But what I was noticing in that was that I could teach them some skills. There'd maybe be a little bit of a lift, like a little bit of improvement for a week or two. And then things would kind of go back to normal, which is not unusual because it's habit change and behavior change. But even more importantly, even when they adopted the skills and the skills stuck, they looked very, very different depending on the mindset of the leader in the first place. And so what I mean by that, for example, is I remember teaching like a communication model to some leaders for performance management purposes. And leaders that had, I would say, a very collaborative, like very interconnected mindset where they really get the importance of their relationships with people, they took that model and they, added it to their toolkit, started, using that, developed the skills, and it was masterful. I had other leaders who I would say had a much more, what I like to refer to as the superiority mindset, right? They think I'm better than you. I'm a manager. I know more, etc. They would take those same communication skills and use them to manipulate people, use them as almost further evidence of here's how I know so much more than you. I'm now even a much more effective communicator than you. And so the skills, depending on our mindset again, show up very, very differently. And that for me became the key of, there's some groundwork to do before we even get into skills of who are you? What's important to you? How do you want to show up? And so then that leads into why would you even want these skills and how do you intend to apply them? Because some leaders sincerely want to be better. And there are some, and I'll hesitate in this instance to call them leaders. Some it's more, give me whatever else I can to hold on to more status, more power, more control. And I will use those tools on people, which is very different than adopting, applying, integrating the tools because you're trying to be a better human being.
Well, that's a wonderful segue to introduce a new concept of mindset to our listeners, which is the horizontal mindset and the vertical mindset.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is at the core of what we do at Dynamic Achievement. We've made this really clear distinction between what we call the horizontal mindset and the vertical mindset. And so very briefly, the horizontal mindset, we are all familiar with it. All humans have it. And unfortunately, we have a lot of it in our thinking and how we operate, because the horizontal mindset is driven by fear and greed. And so we all know what fear is like. I mean, fear is it's one of our core emotions. It drives a lot of what we do. It drives a lot of what we don't do, right? We don't speak up because we're scared of consequences or hurting someone's feelings. We don't put ourselves out there because we're worried that we might fail. So fear gets in our way a lot. It also compels us to do things sometimes we wouldn't normally do. I start to argue with you and get defensive because I'm scared actually of what you might think of me, or scared that in fact I might be wrong. So fear gets in the way for us a lot. And most of us can relate to that on some level. The other one is greed. And greed, not just in the context of someone wanting more money or more power, or again, more status, more control. That's also very true in how greed shows up. But it's also this really subtler form of greed, which is I want something that isn't what I currently have. And it can show up in ways like, oh, I liked this company so much more 10 years ago when it was a small family business and everybody knew everybody and it was really nice. And oh, I wish things could be like how they were 10 years ago. Or we get stuck in, oh, if only, like when I finally get that new job or that promotion or that raise or the new title, whatever it is, then I'll be happy. So in other words, greed shows up when we're not even satisfied with what we have in this particular moment because we're stuck in the past or we're stuck in the future. And that's a real challenge for us. And so the horizontal mindset is one of the reasons we refer to it as horizontal, because we literally get stuck in a time and place that's not where we are right now, which can become a real recipe for disaster because we're not even attentive to what's in front of us at this moment. And it means we're just relentlessly dissatisfied, unhappy, miserable, etc. So the horizontal mindset keeps us all quite stuck. And it shows up, with a number of these mindsets. We've actually identified 7 mindsets in the horizontal and 7 in the vertical. That victim mindset I mentioned earlier is one of them in the horizontal. So is that superior mindset. But then we have the vertical mindset. And we all have this too, because this is fundamentally us as humans at our best. Because the vertical mindset is not driven by fear and greed like the horizontal. The vertical mindset is driven by creation. Because at our best as human beings, we are here to create. I mean, we are all here because of an act of procreation, right? And this is what we do with our lives. We create our interests, our hobbies. We end up creating our own families. We create careers. We create organizations and innovations and products and services. And certainly the pandemic has shown us just how creative people can become, right? No matter what, we are constantly trying to evolve and grow and innovate. And this for me is the human spirit at its very best. And so when we come from that place of I want to create something, I want to make a difference, I want to have impact, that's a very different mindset than the horizontal, which is really just stuck in what's in it for me? How do I protect myself? How do I make sure I look good? It's a very, very different way of approaching life. And it means very, very different outcomes will result from that. And this is really at the core of what we do. And so the other big thing that a culture of excellence will have in common is that the majority of people are operating from a vertical mindset most of the time. We're never going to get fully away from the horizontal mindset. That's not the point. It's not about us all being perfect and perfectly beautiful and enlightened human beings. We're all a work in progress, but it is about how can we be more vertical more often and make more of these choices that take the high road and do the right thing, the better thing for more people than just these selfish, what's in it for me kind of choices.
I think that's a key out there to do more things more vertical more often. So is vertical mindset an alternative or other name of growth mindset, or is it to stay optimistic all the time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question because we get that a lot of, is this the same as growth mindset? I'm gonna venture to say that vertical mindset goes beyond growth mindset. Growth mindset is for sure a component of the vertical mindset because part of being vertical and being a creator means I have to believe in growth mindset, right? I have to believe that I can continually evolve, learn, discover, etc. But it goes beyond that with a couple of other elements. Is that not only is there growth mindset embedded, it's also a collaborative mindset, because I can have growth mindset, but still be very focused on myself. But vertical mindset is still about what about the bigger whole? Because I get that we are all interconnected, right? That everything I say and do has a ripple effect, and everything that you say and do has a ripple effect. So vertical mindset is about growth, but it's also about collaboration and interconnection. And then the other key piece of the vertical mindset is that it's about meaning and purpose. When we're in our vertical mindset, I understand that there's a reason I'm here on this earth. And I understand that there's a legacy I'm going to create by the time I leave this earth. Now, the question only is, what is the legacy I want to leave? Is it going to be one that's had a positive impact and really made a difference? Or is it one where frankly, I either wasted a lot of time or I didn't do a lot of good. I hurt a lot of people. I mean, you name it, right? We all get to decide it. So it really has those components. It is growth, but it's also about collaboration, interconnection, and about meaning and purpose. And that really sums up the vertical mindset.
Understood. And you made me, and I'm hopeful that all of my listeners also listening to this made us to think, saying that, okay, you told us about vertical mindset. How do I develop this vertical mindset, and what are the indicators to tell me that, okay, I am operating in that kind of vertical mindset?
Yeah. Well, developing a vertical mindset, I mean, that's one of the reasons we do the work we do is we help people do that. We have workshops and, coaching and supportive materials that help people on that path. At the end of the day, the first thing I think it starts with is developing that sense of purpose. And if that seems too ambiguous for people, then I come back to let's even start with your character. If I can't answer the question of, what's my purpose? What is it I hope to create in my lifetime? You can certainly take a look at who do I want to be? What type of person do I want to be known as, even, and especially with my family and friends? We can all take a look at who do I want to be as a starting point. And so I think first it's becoming clear about that, who I am, what's meaningful for me, what are my values. And then there's a lot of work that we do around helping people master the mind and the heart, which frankly, even though we offer it as a program, it's not like you take a 2-day course and like, boom, you suddenly have this vertical mindset for life. It's ongoing daily practices. Right. And there are some for sure that I believe in very strongly. Again, I have a bias from my own practices around it, but there's good evidence in science as well to really support that. I think meditation or mindfulness practices are key because these are one of the ways we start to recognize the mind and what's happening in the mind. I can start to see more and more quickly now when I'm falling into a horizontal or more of an egoic mind versus when am I truly coming from this place of growth, of collaboration, of meaning, etc. It's also about having regular practices around how I interact with other people. So if I'm becoming much clearer on who I am and what's important to me, I now start to have practices around how do I want to make sure I'm interacting with other people to have the impact I mean to have. So for example, if one of the things I want to be known as, I want to be known as someone who's kind and respectful and collaborative, well, then I better make sure my interactions with the people I'm working with actually reflect that. And I have to start, making sure, like, am I in fact creating that impact, or does my team see me, as bossy or, kind of superior, or always telling them what to do instead of involving them, asking them questions, etc. So there's a host of practices, that go into this. But again, I would come back for anyone listening to this today. I would say just start with the question of who am I and how do I want to live my life? What's the impact I want to have? Because even starting to ask those questions, the mind will get busy going to work, trying to figure it out. Then the later steps start to look at, are you in fact living those? And then there's a series of work after that around how to start controlling the mind when we're under stress and challenge and uncertainty and ambiguity and complexity. In other words, the world we are fully immersed in today. Because the fastest thing that's going to pull us into the horizontal is when we get stressed out and frustrated, upset, etc. That's when we often go into our fight or flight defense. And that is one of the biggest traps of the horizontal mind. So there's a lot there too about learning about how we deal with challenge and complexity and stress.
That's a great place to start. Identify what you want to define as your character. Everything else will follow around it. And that's how we started the whole conversation around fear and greed.
Absolutely.
Great. So, Sasha, will take a quick detour, get you to answer some of the quick fire questions before I come back to the heart of our conversation. This is called as the Power of Three round. 3 best advices that Sasha has received thus far.
Yeah. So best pieces of advice that I have ever received. Well, the first one would be stay more vertical more often. And that was given to me originally by my business partner. And so that's always been a really helpful one. The other best piece of advice for me, and this came from like a teacher of mine way, way back actually in high school, when I was dealing with particular challenges, it just said, focus on what are you learning? And that has always stuck with me in terms of whenever I'm dealing with a particular challenge or something I don't like, or, is hard for me to get focused instead on what am I learning as a result. And the third best piece of advice I got was from one of my university professors years ago, who said, if you're trying to be perfect at anything, only worry about being perfect with balance. And that I found really helpful and has stuck with me ever since, because everything has a balance point. And it can be easy to get caught up in a lot of things and doing all sorts of things and trying to be perfect, whatever that actually is. But instead, I've always just focused on how do I find the balance of everything.
Wonderful. 3 routines that you picked up during the pandemic.
Actually, my best and favorite routine, what the pandemic made possible because I wasn't traveling anymore, my meditation, and I have a morning meditation and yoga practice that I do, it wasn't necessarily new during the pandemic, but it became really, really consistent is what I'm trying to say during the pandemic because I wasn't going anywhere. So my meditation and yoga practice became very solid over the last 2 years, which I've been immensely grateful for. The other routine has actually been daily walks outside. I live in a beautiful corner of the world in Vancouver, in the mountains, and with trails not too far from our doorstep. And so daily walks, because I also got a dog in COVID, like nice. A lot of other people here in this neck of the woods anyway. And so that's been another great routine, is just daily walks outside in nature. So it's been amazing. So yeah, the dog, the walks, and my yoga and meditation practice.
Wonderful. If there was no limit, no boundaries, and if you had to have 3 individuals with whom you would like to have dinner with, who would those 3 individuals be?
Well, for me, those 3 individuals, one would be Brene Brown. I would love to have dinner with Brene Brown and listen to her for, a couple of hours and ask her questions, etc. Because she's certainly influenced quite a bit of my work. The other person I would love to have dinner with actually is Alan Mulally, who was the CEO of Boeing and then CEO of Ford Motor Company and one of the best CEOs in the world. I did quite a bit of work as a consultant, still do, with Ford Motor Company. And so I have actually met Alan briefly before, but I have tremendous respect for him as a CEO who really helped turn Ford around. From potentially filing for bankruptcy or anything else. But I also have tremendous respect for him as a human being and someone who models everything I just shared with you about the vertical mindset. I'd love to have dinner with him. And actually, the third person I'd love to have dinner with is my dad, because he passed away quite some time ago now, nearly 20 years ago. And I would love to just have the chance to have dinner with my father.
3 things on your bucket list, Sasja?
Oh, yeah, bucket list. Well, one of them is I really want to trek through the Himalayas. That has been a dream of mine for about a decade. And I always said I would do it around the time I turned 50, which is actually next year. So I'm very hopeful this pandemic will go away so that more of these travel plans become quite possible. And I'm not too concerned about that. That's definitely one thing for sure. The other thing on my bucket list has actually been to do some cycling through Europe. My husband is a big cycler and quite an avid racer. I'm a so-so cycler, not much of a racer anymore, but I'd definitely love to do that and do some cycling in Europe. And actually, the third thing on my bucket list, which I'm starting to work on this year, is writing a book about mindset. So to be able to put more of that out into the world. So that is going to be my big labor of love over the next year and a bit.
That's wonderful. Looking forward to that release of the book and your trip to the Himalayas.
Yeah, me too. Maybe I'll go to the Himalayas to celebrate the launch of the book.
Yeah. Why not? The last of the power of 3 rounds, Sasja. 3 best investments that you could make in yourself.
The best investments I can make in myself. One is, and I still believe this, even though I do it, I'm very keen on that morning meditation and yoga practice. There's something about that for me that really sets a different tone to my mind, my heart, my spirit, and therefore my whole day. So that's a big one for sure. The other biggest investment I can make in myself is making sure that I am creating space for myself to create. Because one of the tendencies I've had to, figure again, finding the balance over the years between getting busy doing a lot of stuff and doing my work, for example, with clients, which I love, And sometimes I do so much of it, though, I don't leave enough space for myself to really be able to create and evolve and move some things forward in another way. So that's another big investment is creating. And I mean, I coach a lot of my clients on creating white space for themselves to think and to plan and dream. And so I'm working on doing the same for myself. That's the other big investment. And then the third one is related perhaps to the yoga, but even more so just really investing in my health and well-being, right? And that's become very important to me in terms of making sure I eat well, I sleep well, and that I'm moving and getting exercise throughout the days and the weeks, because if I'm not operating at my best, then everything else becomes a moot point. I can't have a vertical mindset. I can't show up well for other people. I don't have the energy, right? So that for me has become the biggest investment and I had to get my mindset away from, oh, that's selfish. That's, I'm taking time away from whether it's my family, et cetera. Well, the truth is when I take good care of myself, my family gets the better version of me. So I think that's an investment that's worth it for me and for them.
Thank you. So we did talk about vertical mindset and horizontal mindset. We did talk about the culture of excellence and the role the leaders will have to play. And closely related to that is, and with all of the work that you have been doing across industry, across organization, tell us a bit more about the role the leaders have on the impact of health and well-being of their team members. I can tee it off with your own personal story, that if you would want to share it with our business, and then tee it off from your own observations working with a lot of the organizations.
Sure. Yeah. And you're right, because this goes back to, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, my father dying right as I was launching into my graduate work. And so the full story of that is that my father was a heavy duty mechanic and not an easy job, right? And, a lot of, very intensive kind of blue collar job, long days. So it was never, I would say, the easiest job or perhaps the most delightful work environment, but it got a lot worse in the last couple of years for my dad because a manager had been brought in who it turned out was quite a toxic manager and started bullying my father, who initially was the type of person who would not stay quiet. He was never afraid to speak up, not afraid to voice an opinion. But because of that, he became a target with this manager and started experiencing a bunch of toxicity, anything from being given crap work shifts, told off all the time, disciplined in various ways. And this man started making my father's life quite miserable. And my father actually started having trouble sleeping, which at first was, a few nights here and there. I mean, we've all had a bad night's sleep worrying about stuff at work. But unfortunately, in my dad's case, it became quite chronic and it turned into months and months and months of not sleeping. And, at this point, he had to go off work on disability because he couldn't function very well because he wasn't sleeping. He had a ton of, the stress chemicals, cortisol and adrenaline in his system. And all of that to say that after about 10, 11 months of this, my dad actually took his own life because he was so desperate to sleep and to rest. At that point, he had lost, the ability to think of, is there any way out of this? So all of that to say, this was just as I was launching into my graduate work. And so I very quickly pivoted in the research I was doing to wanting to understand the impact that managers or leaders have on their people. Because this was in about 2004. And at the time, at least here in Canada and North America, there was a big focus on the time on workplace wellness. And companies were doing all these things like a lunch hour yoga program or a, pedometer contest and how many steps can you take, which is all fine and good. But I wanted to know, is that really enough? And so I started doing this research as part of my graduate degree around the impact that leaders have on the health and well-being of their people. Now, this is almost 20 years ago, so it almost seems like, child's play today because we know so much more. But even back then at the time, what I found was it didn't matter if the organization was offering, these lunchtime programs and, exercise classes and that kind of thing. If at the end of the day, employees didn't feel trusted or respected or valued, or they didn't feel a sense of fairness with their manager, if those things were not in place, the mental health of the staff was being impacted because it was creating, back to the horizontal mindset, it was creating all this fear and anxiety and worry about, am I going to be punished, disciplined? Like I can't trust my boss. They don't trust me, whatever it is. So it was very, very clear to me that one of the strongest predictors of our health and well-being in the workplace is about the relationship we have with our boss. That also, of course, extends to the relationships we have with our coworkers, and anyone who's been part of a dysfunctional team, anything to being part of a toxic team or where there's been bullying, harassment in place, of course, at the extreme. But even if it doesn't go that far, even when you're just part of a dysfunctional team, I think we can all relate to the fact that it just makes our lives miserable. And the longer that goes on or the more intense it is, the greater impact that potentially has on our mental health and well-being, especially if we don't even know or we haven't done the work ourselves around how to develop our own mindset, right? Because the natural tendency for the brain is to go into fight or flight, to go into the horizontal mindset. The effects this is why it becomes so compounding. You have horizontal behaviors showing up at work. Then you have people like going into a horizontal mindset, and it unfortunately becomes a really negative, toxic, and in my father's case, sometimes, a life-altering spiral. So that work that I do with organizations is about trying to reverse all of that. It's about trying to get that spiral moving upward in a different direction. How do we change some of the behaviors? How do we change the mindsets so that we start moving these things in a much more vertical way, in my language, so that in fact, we have relationships between leaders and employees where there is a stronger sense of trust, where people know that they're valued, where people do feel seen and heard and actually cared for as a person, not just a cog in the big wheel of the organization.
That's so very true. I think it's no brainer when you hear all of these things and say that what drives excellence, what drives organization to propel forward is operating in that kind of a vertical mindset.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I am sure we'll not be able to do enough justice to kind of cover the entire gamut of what does it take for leaders to create that kind of a thriving workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to share a couple of thoughts for all the listeners out here, saying that as leaders, as individuals of a team, what are the few things that people can do to increase their own awareness, create that kind of a thriving culture, and hence operate a lot more frequently in a vertical mindset?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the truth is the answer for leaders is not so different than what I said earlier for anyone. And in fact, where I start with leaders is get very clear on who you want to be as a human being and the impact you want to have, especially so as a leader, because the impact you have is far greater than you even realize. Most leaders, they get, in a way, they have impact, but they don't really get how much impact they have. And of course, the higher you are, so to speak, in the organization, the greater the impact, because you are making decisions that impact the lives of everybody else in the organization.
And beyond.
And beyond, absolutely, right? But very directly in the organization in terms of people's schedules, how much money they make, how much time off they have or don't have. Never mind like how they're treated, within the work itself. So it starts there for leaders for sure. And then the self-awareness about, am I in fact showing up the way I think I'm showing up? Because one thing I think leaders are challenged with, and this I also believe is true, and I've seen it, the higher people go in an organization, the higher they go, the less feedback they tend to get. Because again, if you have power over me, I'm less likely to go and tell my boss what I don't like about your behavior, what I, think about what you've done and how I think you could have done it better. If I have a good relationship with you as my manager, I'll be willing to give you that feedback. But if we don't have a good relationship, or I'm worried about how you're going to take it, or you have taken it badly in the past, then people just stop giving leaders feedback. And so there can be a big disconnect between how leaders see themselves and the experience that the staff are actually having of that leader. And I've seen it, of course, in a number of assessments and just in my own work with leaders and teams over time. And that's one of the biggest dangers when leaders do not have the awareness of how they are actually showing up for other people. So it is first and foremost finding out and asking yourself, who am I? How do I want to live? What's the impact I want to have? But then as a leader, your next job is to find out, is that actually true? Is that in fact like how I am showing up for other people? And that takes, frankly, a lot of courage and a lot of humility to be willing to find out and get the feedback of, is this in fact how I am showing up for people? And if you're not getting any feedback from people, that's usually a good indicator that you're not having the impact you want, because it means they don't even feel safe enough to tell you the truth.
And in order to create a thriving workplace where leaders can take care of the health and well-being of their team members, I go back to the same question that I asked earlier on. What are the 3 best investments leaders can make in their people?
The best investments leaders can make in their people, first and foremost, is the leader has to invest in creating a relationship with their people. And I know that's hard sometimes. I mean, I work with some leaders who have way too many people on their teams. So that's a whole other topic for sure. But ideally, leaders are creating a relationship with each of their team members. And that's been an interesting development, of course, in the pandemic as well, where a lot of companies moved to remote and virtual work. And a lot of relationships have suffered because of that. But even still, it doesn't become an excuse. As a leader, I need to make sure that one of my primary jobs is to take the time to make sure I'm getting to know each of my people, not just the work they're doing, but who they are as human beings, what's important to them, what motivates them, what they find helpful in terms of my support and what they don't, so all of those things. So I think that investment of not just time, but connecting with each employee is really, really critical. And then the second thing related to that is investing in, does this employee have everything they need to be successful? Because one of the key jobs of leaders is to remove the obstacles out of the way, because obstacles are inevitably going to show up for employees that they don't have the power or the authority or even the resources sometimes to be able to overcome. As their manager, that's my job, is to remove obstacles. It should be a key part of my job anyway. So I think that's also a really important one. And then the third one, I think, is also helping to support that employee's development, whether that's professionally, like how they want to grow within the organization, as well as personally, like how do I help support this employee to develop their own health and well-being, their own sense of balance, et cetera. I think there's a really important investment there, both financially, emotionally, time-wise, et cetera, of how do I help support this employee's development so that I know for sure that they are growing and thriving within the organization.
Excellent piece of investment that leaders can look into. So this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. So as we wrap up, what is Sasja's Inspire Someone Today message to all the listeners out there?
I think the last thing I would say today, I hope this is inspirational for people, but I would just say, remember that you always have a choice. Life is going to throw a ton of stuff at us. It already has. It will continue to do so. These are complex and some very hard times on the planet right now. And we always have a choice about how we're going to respond to those things. So I think that's the key thing that I would want to, I think we all know that on one level as human beings, but we forget it a lot. And then we step back into, this is happening, poor us or poor me or whatever it is. But we always have a choice about how to respond to our circumstances.
That's so very true. We always have a choice to respond to circumstances. Unfortunately, I don't want to kind of exercise that choice of closing this conversation, but I have to make that choice. I have no choice here.
Oh, you do, but I get it. We had an agreement, so it's fine.
Then on that note, Sasja, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming up so early your time to share this pearls of wisdom with me and my listeners. Appreciate it and thank you. Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what you listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.